Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson, and today I'd like to give my thoughts on a game I just beat. That game being Resident Evil 2, the 2019 remake on the PS4. The 2019 remake of Resident Evil 2 was developed and published by Capcom. It is a third-person, over-the-shoulder Metroidvania game. 2 years ago, I had played Resident Evil 7 and enjoyed that game a lot. I especially enjoyed replaying the game over and over, using the prizes given for completing certain game objectives to my advantage. When this remake was announced, I didn't pay mind to it too much, but as the release date of this game grew closer, I became more and more excited. I picked up this remake hoping Capcom would continue to build upon what they had done within 7, and make a similarly replayable and engaging experience. After playing through this new remake, Capcom not only evolved the Resident Evil 7 experience further, but I think they improved upon it in a lot of ways as well. Being a third-person shooter, players can move around in a 3D space and shoot. One of the first noticeable qualities of how the characters control in this game is how sluggish the movement might feel. The controls are definitely responsive, but moving is purposefully awkward. Turning around is especially slowed down, not to a point where it is detrimental, but rather it is almost subtle, at least until the player starts to encounter enemies. This slower movement works very well with Resident Evil 2's environments, which are always mostly tight hallways. These hallways are always giving off a tense atmosphere with their lack of space. They also almost always wind around with turns, making corners that the player will condition themselves to peek around before even proceeding. Bigger rooms in the game will always have some kind of obstacles placed around it, which helps all rooms within the game feel consistently claustrophobic. This game also makes you feel constantly vulnerable. With this remake of Resident Evil 2, Capcom revisits the concept of zombies as enemies in their game. While not horrifying by sight, these zombies are always a threat to the player, no matter where they are in the game. The zombies will lumber around aimlessly until they see the player. Once these zombies have sight of the player, they will slowly make their way towards them. While they are walking toward the player, they can have quick bursts of quick movement, so the player has to stay on their toes and make sure they have the space they need in order to take the zombie out. The best place to shoot a zombie in Resident Evil 2 is in the head. So, the developers made sure to build movements for the zombies so that they're always moving their head and making that part of their body harder to hit. The health system in the game is in the form of a status bar that tells the player if they're fine, hurt, or if in danger. And with the amount of zombies throughout the game, the player will need to gather supplies as they explore through the game's settings. However, players start out with an extremely limited inventory they can use to store their supplies in. They can eventually expand it to double its size as they progress. The supplies that the players can collect include key items, healing items, weapons, and ammunition. Players can also combine and examine items to either obtain better supplies or find secrets within the items. The progression within the Resident Evil 2 remake here has the player moving in and out of rooms, collecting important items or supplies as they go along. Some of these rooms have sections that require items to be used that can be only found later in the game. In a lot of ways, this and other moments like this in the remake had me feeling like there was a lot of influence drawn upon Metroidvania video game titles. Players even grow stronger as they progress, with better weapons, stockpiled ammunition, and a more familiar layout of the rooms, and items that will help the player if they ever get themselves in a bind. The Resident Evil 2 remake even has a Metroidvania-style map that the player can use to see where they've been and if all of the items in that room have been collected. Now, as pointed out before, the horror from the zombies in Resident Evil 2 come from how vulnerable the player is to them at all times. The sound design within the game also helps the scary atmosphere a lot. For example, whenever a zombie sees you, some ambient drone music will start playing, and that zombie will start making louder noises. Certain other sounds will be elevated as well to accentuate the danger. Tension also plays a big part of the horror in this game, with the fear of losing your progression to a potential threat around the corner contributing to that tension. Resident Evil 2 also has some great lighting techniques being used, as well as smoke effects. Safe rooms are always brightly lit and well put together, while hallways with enemies are dark, wet, and look like they're falling apart. This is a great way to communicate to the player a present threat, without overtly alluding to it. Finally, Resident Evil 2 offers a lot of extra content. When you first start out the game, you have 2 characters to choose from, each with their own unique attributes and their own unique storylines. Beating a character's initial story unlocks a second run mode that will mix up item placements, save locations, and certain plot beats. Resident Evil 2 also has bonus modes, where you run to a certain point within the game with only a certain set of supplies and loads of zombies in your path. Alternate costumes and bonus weapons can also be unlocked throughout the game, much like Resident Evil 7. It's safe to say that Resident Evil 2 will have you continually playing it past your initial playthrough. Now, I did have a couple of disliked aspects about this remake of Resident Evil 2. The vocals and dialogue within the game seemed to be mixed a bit too low, and there would be other sounds and music that would overtake the dialogue at times, making it hard to hear what characters were saying. I also thought the characters were a bit generic, with them mostly being their motivations rather than their characters, and this made some of the choices they make throughout the game seem to not make sense too much, and that took me out of the experience at times. Finally, I thought the true ending within the game was pretty bad, and gives the player no new information on what they just played. But overall, I really like this remake of Resident Evil 2. Having not played the original, I really got a lot out of this game, and I feel like Capcom evolved a lot past what they had done within Resident Evil 7. That's why I'm going to give this game a final score of a 9 out of 10. There were a couple of things that held this game back for me, but otherwise this is a solid game, and I would recommend this to anybody who is looking for a solid horror experience, a solid Metroidvania experience, a solid third-person shooter experience, or just a solid action game experience overall. This remake of Resident Evil 2 has a lot of replayability, and I very much appreciate that, and I can't wait to see what Capcom does with this formula even more. That concludes my review of the Resident Evil 2 2019 remake. If you like this review, you can like, comment, or subscribe. I also have social media links down in the description below, as well as a link to my online portfolio where you can see game design works that I have done. And with that out of the way, please make sure to have a nice day.